On the evening of May 8, 1982, Gilles Villeneuve was pronounced dead. He was 32 years old, a husband, a father, and by almost universal agreement, the most electrifying racing driver alive. Hours earlier, he had climbed into his Ferrari for what should have been a routine qualifying lap at the circuit Zolder in Belgium. He never came back, and the question that has haunted Formula One ever since is not simply what went wrong in those final seconds, but how a combination of speed, misunderstanding, and split-second human instinct conspired to steal one of the sport's greatest talents in the blink of an eye. To understand what happened at Zolder, you have to understand what Formula One was in 1982. This was not a sport that dealt comfortably with the idea of restraint. It was an era of raw ambition, both on the track and in the engineering rooms. The cars of that period were ground effect machines, generating enormous aerodynamic downforce by channeling air beneath flat-bottomed bodywork. They were brutally fast in corners, knife-edge sensitive to ride height, and deeply demanding to drive. One wrong input, one misread surface, and the margin for error essentially disappeared. The 1982 season had already begun in controversy before a single competitive lap was completed in Belgium. A driver's strike at the opening round in South Africa had fractured relationships between the drivers and the governing body, FISA. There was tension in the paddock, tension in the boardroom, and, though few were willing to say it openly, tension inside the Ferrari garage. Villeneuve and his teammate Didier Pironi had shared the front row at the previous round in San Marino. What unfolded between them in that race had left Villeneuve furious in a way that people close to him had rarely seen. He believed Pironi had betrayed a team agreement, taking a victory that he felt was rightfully his. He had barely spoken to anyone since. He arrived at Zolder carrying that anger like ballast. The circuit Zolder was a fast, flowing track through the flat Belgian landscape, surrounded by spectators pressed close to barriers that offered little buffer against anything going wrong. It was not a circuit that forgave mistakes. It demanded commitment because commitment was the only way around it quickly, and in qualifying, quickly was everything. Saturday afternoon brought the final qualifying session for the Belgian Grand Prix. With the clock running down, teams were pushing their drivers for one last flying lap to secure the best possible grid position. Villeneuve was not happy with where he sat in the order. That was all he needed. He went back out. Jochen Mass was a seasoned German driver with March. By the latter stages of qualifying, he was not on a hot lap. He was on an out lap, slowing, managing his tires, positioning himself for another run. On a circuit during qualifying, this creates a familiar and dangerous dynamic. Faster cars on flying laps weave through slower cars on cool-down laps, and the responsibility for avoiding each other falls on both sides, with signals, mirrors, and instinct doing most of the work. Mass was cruising along the back section of the circuit when he became aware of Villeneuve approaching at extraordinary speed from behind. This was not unusual. What followed was, in his mirror, Mass could see the red Ferrari closing fast. He made a decision: move right and give Villeneuve the left side of the track to pass. It was a reasonable, sensible decision, the kind drivers make dozens of times during a qualifying session. But at almost the same instant, Villeneuve had made the opposite calculation. He too moved right, not out of aggression, not out of error, out of the same logic, looking for the cleaner line, the better run onto the straight ahead. Neither driver had any way of knowing what the other had chosen. There was no time for mirrors, no time for radio, no time for anything. At closing speeds that compressed reaction time to fractions of a second, two experienced professionals made two perfectly reasonable decisions, and both of them were wrong. The Ferrari's front wing struck the rear of Mass's March. That contact was enough. At the speed Villeneuve was traveling, the aerodynamic forces underneath his car combined with the ramp of the impact to do what physics dictated. The Ferrari was launched violently into the air. What happened next lasted only seconds, but the images that witnesses and cameras captured have never left anyone who saw them. The car became airborne, flipping and disintegrating as it went. Parts scattered across the track, and the runoff area. When the wreckage came back to Earth, Villeneuve was no longer in it. He had been thrown clear during the sequence, still strapped to his seat, still wearing his helmet, but exposed completely to the forces of impact. He came to rest in the catch fencing near the edge of the circuit. Medical crews reached him within minutes. He was alive, but catastrophically injured. The damage to his cervical spine was irreversible. He was airlifted to the University Hospital in Leuven. Mass climbed from his own car, largely unharmed. At 6:17 that evening, Gilles Villeneuve was declared dead. The Formula One paddock absorbed the news in near silence. The Belgian Grand Prix continued the following day. The sport had a complicated, imperfect relationship with the decision of when racing was appropriate after tragedy, and Carlos Reutemann's retirement from Formula One, announced that same weekend, was almost lost in the weight of everything else. Ferrari did not race. Didier Pironi, whatever had passed between him and Villeneuve, drove. He finished second. It was one of the more quietly devastating scenes in the sport's modern history. FISA opened an inquiry. Questions were raised about circuit safety, about the management of qualifying sessions, about how cars and drivers moving at such different speeds could share the same piece of track with so little formal structure governing their interaction. Mass, for his part, was exonerated. The misunderstanding had been genuine and tragic, a collision of two correct instincts arriving at the worst possible moment. The grief that followed was not limited to the paddock. Villeneuve had been beloved across the entire sport by fans, by rivals, by journalists who had spent years struggling to adequately describe what it was they were watching when he drove. He had never won a world championship, despite possessing talent that most who saw him believed exceeded nearly everyone else on the grid. He had always said the day would come. It did not. What changed in the immediate wake of Zolder was incremental rather than revolutionary. Discussions about how to better manage qualifying traffic intensified. The question of driver vulnerability during accidents, the risk of being ejected from a car, drove continued research into cockpit retention and harness design. The HANS device, which would eventually address the specific mechanism of cervical spine injury, was still years away from becoming mandatory, but the conversation about head and neck protection moved with greater urgency after 1982. In a broader sense, Villeneuve's death joined a painful lineage of losses that slowly, imperfectly, and with enormous human cost, pushed Formula One toward becoming a safer sport. His name is invoked not merely as a tribute to brilliance, but as a reminder of the price the sport once demanded and of how much remained to be done. The circuit Zolder hosted its last Formula One race that same weekend in 1982. It never appeared on the calendar again. Gilles Villeneuve finished his last qualifying lap in pieces across a Belgian infield. He had been going faster than almost anyone else on the circuit. He always was. Some drivers race. Some drivers simply refuse to accept any other way of existing. Villeneuve was the second kind, and the sport has spent more than 4 decades trying to make sense of the silence he left behind. If this kind of deep dive documentary storytelling is what you come here for, subscribing keeps more of it coming.